Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank President Scheitberger and all the locals from across our two great countries for giving myself and Dan the opportunity to come here and speak about the ghost ship incident that happened on December 2nd, 2016 in Oakland, California. Prior to that event, 1315 31st Avenue was just another commercial building in the city of Oakland. But at 11:24 that evening, it turned into what has been known now as the ghost ship. A little brief history about the building. This building was a two-story concrete cinder block warehouse built in 1930 with a combined square footage of roughly about 10,000 square feet. It was the wooden roof gable built upon steel trusses with about 10 or 12 layers of rolled comp material. Now, the current tenant that many of you have seen on the incident and seen on the media described the ghost ship as a living piece of art, and an artist's collective. So as you can see through these next couple slides here, these are the fuel loads that we were dealing with prior to even getting into this incident. So what you're seeing in here these are trailers that were built inside of a warehouse, and everything else was built around it. Every square inch of this warehouse had something attached to the wall, hung, or some sort of art piece attached to this. As you can see there on the left-hand side, the staircase, this is the infamous staircase that we're going to talk about as we move along, that was built out of pallets. And this was the main exit from the dance floor on the second floor where the 36 victims passed, and how they were supposed to get out with the conditions you are about to see. Can you go ahead and play the audio, please?
Hello? Hi, what is the address of the emergency?
It's 1305 31st Avenue.
What's the phone? So there's a warehouse on fire at 1305 31st Street?
Yes, 31st Avenue.
31st Avenue. Okay, we're on the way.
Now, one of the great things about the Oakland Fire Department is that we have the ability for our dispatch center to open up all the speakers in the station. As soon as a 911 call comes in with any type of fire, they open up all the speakers. So we actually get a head start on dispatch before the dispatch and the tones even come through. So what you heard is what everyone heard across the city in all the fire stations. Fire Station 13, which you see on the bottom there, is roughly about 2 blocks from the ghost ship. And their initial on-scene arrival and what they saw is what we're going to follow here. Granted, this is a couple minutes into the fire, but this is close to what they encountered upon initial arrival. And I myself, Lieutenant Robertson was on Engine 4, and Engine 17 were the first 3 units along with Truck 2. And we had a full 3 engines in the truck on scene within the first 4 minutes. So as you can see from the front, there was a large volume of thick, heavy gray smoke coming out of most of the openings of the building, as we just saw. Our units were tasked with a very, very difficult initial fire attack. The only main opening that we could see was a man-made door that was cut out of a roll-up on the front of the commercial building. The exposures here that we had, and this was the way they were going to have to get through here. So you can see the pianos, and for some reason these individuals had an affinity for pianos. There was pianos everywhere. So you can see just out of the gate with how much smoke conditions and the survivability profile and how difficult the task was going to be. Through here, through the front, you look at this big log jam of people up front. It's because there was a large amount of art, and I don't know if you can see above the front door, but that was a fender. So the individuals had an automobile fender over the front. And if you can look to the bottom of the purple vehicle there, that's a makeshift bomb. It looked like an old airplane bomb, so that was also log jamming up the front. So for us to be able to stretch hose and hose lines to get through there made it extremely difficult. So this is a general footprint of what the building looked like. So you had two floors, and the initial fire started on that first floor, but above the wooden staircase, like I said, you can see the main staircase on the right there, which was constructed of pallets. One of the biggest issues was that the floor wasn't a sealed floor. The floor was a wood constructed floor, but it wasn't completely sealed. So as soon as the fire started on that bottom of that building, they started to get smoke coming through the floor. So even if the individuals got low, like we teach people to get low to crawl out, even if they were low, they were still in the worst possible area they could be for that fire. So this is the general footprint of the building. You can see there around the blue squares that 1315 was the main part of the ghost ship, and 1305 was the Bravo side, which had just a ton of materials. And from my initial arrival, could see that I was worried about this building, but I was also worried about the potential of possibly losing the whole block. As I was doing my initial size up, I had multiple people telling me that there were people in there as they were approaching me and coming up. And my 3 engines, I gave them the initial assignment to pull a 2.5 in there and start trying to effect a effective fire attack. I had one individual come up to me, and he goes, "There's 50 or 70 people in there," and trying to maintain that mental focus on getting in there, getting an aggressive fire attack, being able to mitigate this incident, but also dealing with the fact that we possibly could have 50 to 70 people was difficult as that initial incident commander. My initial size up in my 360 showed that door on that A side of the building was going to be our main entrance. There was nothing that I could see from my 360 that was going to allow us any other possible way to get into this building. And from knowing human nature, most people leave the same way they came in. So looking at that point, I figured, okay, well, if we're going to find people, if people are going to be able to be rescued, they're going to be rescued through that A side of the building. I did make the tactical decision to not announce that there was a large amount of people in that building. I know some people in this room might go, well, why would you do such a thing? Well, my thing is I know the crews that I work with, and I know the aggressive nature of the Oakland Fire Department. We are an aggressive interior structural firefighting department. And I know had I made that initial, hey, we've got 50 or 70 people, that the crews there, Lieutenant Robertson, they would have pushed and pushed and pushed to do everything they could to be able to get those people out of that building. So I made the decision to hold that inside, that I knew that if we were going to find people, that it was going to be within that first 50 feet of that 2.5. That building was telling me that that fire was deep-seated in heavy fuels, and that if survivors were going to be found, like I said, it was going to be within that first 50 feet. I did have a trigger point, though. As I was able to position myself, that first video we saw, my command post was right there on that Alpha Bravo corner. So I did have a trigger point that if that thing got in, deep-seated into the second floor, just by looking at how that building was constructed, that I was pretty sure that there wasn't going to be great access into that second floor. And as we moved on in the investigation, we did find out that those second floor stairs were built out of pallets, so my assumption was correct. Now, as this incident developed, I'm not here just to talk about how we pulled hose lines and how we threw ladders and how we cut holes in the roof, but I just want to talk about some of the really challenging and some of the different issues that we faced as this incident developed. It was different, and I think Dan will agree with me that it was like no other fire I'd ever been to. And not just because we had 36 fatalities, but just the sense of calm as we pulled up on scene. As we pulled up and I'm walking down to do my 360 and Dan and the crews are pulling hose lines, there's people milling all over the place, but there's nobody saying anything. And for many of you that work in major metropolitan cities or work wherever you work, you've gone on fires where people will be outside and they're yelling, "My baby, my baby, my baby," and it's their dog or it's their cat. There was nothing going on here. And it was kind of eerie because as we're walking around, there's people milling everywhere. So we just, the sense of calm that was on the scene was something like I've never faced before.
Get out the door. update on conditions on U engine 4 and engine 17. We had a little bit of change in fire conditions on the alpha side. Are you guys doing all right?
So that's a tough video for me to watch, and it doesn't look like much. It just looks like mass confusion, but that's on that alpha side of the building. But if you could hear towards the later part of that transaction in the transmission, you can hear me come up on the air, and I asked the fire attack group if these guys are okay. Because while I'm at the command post, all of a sudden I hear this huge roar, and it sounds, you know, like people are watching fireworks or something incredible just happened. And as I look at the building, I see the smoke had just lit up. And I went through, as the president talked about yesterday, the worst thing, and some of you ICs that have been here maybe had to deal with Maydays. I went through the mental gymnastics of the fact that I may have possibly just lost 3 crews, seeing how the rapid change in fire conditions had just happened. So I made that call to the fire attack group and asked them, and I made the initial call, and I got no response. And you want to talk about the longest 5 seconds in your life as you're sitting there thinking about, okay, RIT deployment, fourth alarm, families, funerals, all those things that come through your head as you're sitting there trying to maintain and your crew safety and your crew's going home is the most important thing that we want to do. And having that time lapse with felt like minutes, but as you see there, it's basically about 45 seconds. But that was very, very, very trying for me. And like I said, that first attempt, there's no answer. The second attempt, long. And then I thought about how complex that RIT deployment might possibly be, but fortunately, that was not the case. So we aggressively fought this fire from the interior with the hopes of finding survivors or recovering victims for 29 minutes. Before the fire hit that trigger point, it became well established into the second floor. And we transitioned from an interior attack to an exterior attack with the goal of keeping it confined to that main building. As we switched into that defensive attack, that emotional roller coaster kept coming. Now, when we get fires in Oakland, we get multiple law enforcement agencies, and we get Alco Sheriff, we get OPD, and so I'm sitting there and we're trying to maintain and run the fire, and an OPD officer comes up to me and he hands me a list. And he goes, "Chief, I got a list." I go, "Okay, great." He hands me a list, and ladder pipes and bells and whistles and everything go, and I look at it and I go, "Oh, 15 names." And he goes, "Yeah, this is 15 names. And granted, we had corralled everybody into this Wendy's parking lot. He goes, "Okay, 15 names." I go, "Okay, so that's what we're thinking. That's what we're looking at, 15 names." And he goes, "No, Chief, you gotta flip the list over." And I flipped the list over, and there's 45 more names on there. So now I'm thinking, I was like, oh my gosh, we're looking at 60 names, 60 people that are lost in this fire. So trying to keep myself focused, keep my crews focused so that they can do what they need to do and finish the task, but then also thinking about how are we going to process this? How are we going to get through this? How are we going to deal with the loss of possibly 60 people in the city? Having to compartmentalize that and focus on the incident and keep the company safe and put this building out is what we needed to do and how we needed to move on to keep sifting through and find these people. But that wasn't the hardest part. It got progressively worse. As I stated, there's a lot of law enforcement agencies on hand, and Alco Sheriff runs the Coroner's Bureau and Oakland PD runs the city police department. Well, Alco Sheriff's deputy walks up to me and he goes, "Chief," and he goes, "Good morning, good evening, how are you?" He goes, "I just have a question for you." He said, where did you put all the people that you got out of the building?" And I said, "Everyone we've gotten out, we put in the Wendy's parking lot." And he looks at me and he goes, "Are you sure?" I go, "Yeah, I'm sure. We've done a thorough search. We've gotten everybody in." And he goes, "Did you transport anyone by ambulance?" And I said, "Well, we had one person that supposedly got transported, and then we've heard there's been a lot of people that have self-transported, but we haven't really transported anybody else." And he goes, "Are you sure?" I go, "Yeah, I'm sure." And I'm watching his body language, and I thought he was just the Alco Sheriff here to support everything. And he goes, "My 17-year-old son was in there." And I look at him, I said, "Well, how do you know?" And he goes, "Well, his friends that he was with called me and told me that he was in the ghost ship, that he was in the thing." And I said, "Okay, did you call the hospitals?" And he goes, "Yeah, I called all the hospitals." And I said, "Did you try his cell phone?" He goes, "Yeah, I tried his cell phone. I've texted him." And as I'm sitting there, he's done all these things, and I'm watching his emotions and the blood leave his face, and him go through the fact that he lost his son. And everyone in this room here at one time or another has had to tell a loved one that they've lost somebody. But as we're on scene on medicals, we kind of prep ourselves. We get our speech and our monologue about how we're going to relay this information. But when I started this conversation with the sheriff's deputy, I thought he was just there to help process possibly the 36 people that were in that building. I had no idea that I was actually going to have to relay this information to him that he just lost his 17-year-old son. So that was really, really tough. We brought the incident under control at 04:36 hours, and over the next 6 days, the Oakland Fire Department and many surrounding law enforcement and fire agencies worked tirelessly to overhaul and respectfully remove the 36 bodies that were lost that evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Balron. It's essential for all of us in this room as leaders in our fire departments and our unions to be able to talk about behavioral health issues and the challenges that we face openly in our fire stations and our union halls. It's up to us to make this uncomfortable topic more comfortable as we reach out to our brothers and sisters. And the fire at the Ghost Ship Warehouse has given me and us as Oakland members the chance to do that. So post-traumatic stress disorder has been defined a couple of times in this conference. We've all talked about that. Personally, I prefer the term post-traumatic stress injury over post-traumatic stress disorder. An injury is something that we can heal and we can move on from. We can take a systematic approach to move beyond an injury. So I think for us as firefighters, it helps us to talk about it as an injury and rather than a disorder. On the Saturday morning after the Ghost Ship, as my engine company was cleaning up when we got released from the scene, on our way back to the firehouse, in addition to the standard post-fire critique and after incident discussions, I impressed upon the crew the gravity of what had just happened and what was about to happen to us. In my mind, I kept thinking about over and over I kept saying in my mind, this is going to be worse than the Oakland Hills firestorm in '91. I was working then, and that was the big issue in our career up to that point. And all through the night, as things were going on, all I could think of is this is going to be bigger than the Oakland Hills firestorm. We're going to be on the national news for all the wrong reasons again. I impressed upon the crew the importance that they needed to take care of themselves, both mentally and physically, and I outlined the services that were available to them right away if they needed them. And I felt that this was especially important due to the fact that one of the firefighters on my crew that night had just under 2 months out of the academy. Right now in Oakland, as I'm sure it is in a lot of the jurisdictions, especially on the West Coast in California, 28% of all of our line personnel have less than 3 years on the job, so we're a very young department right now. Back at the firehouse, change of shifts, I was able to keep my professional detachment in check, had a quick discussion with the oncoming officers and crew, and I live in my truck company's district, so it's a short drive home. I got home, walked in and tried to speak to my wife, and for the first time since I've been married, no words would come out, and I just broke down and I sobbed. For quite a while, I sobbed uncontrollably in her arms right after I got home from work that morning. Then my cell phone started to ring. It started to ring a lot as the union president. And one of the first to call was General President Shapeberger. I also got calls from the president of the California Professional Firefighters, Lou Polson. District Vice President Frank Lima called. Assistant to the General President, Pat Morrison, called. A lot of my own officers and the members in my own local called. And I have to thank everyone who called, and I'm sure I'm going to forget to thank people. It was important to have that support and that initial reach out come that morning after the incident. It meant a lot, so thank you all so much. At that point, I had been awake for about 30 hours or so. I was really mentally and physically exhausted, and I just wanted to sleep. Later that evening was our fire station holiday Christmas party, and kind of, toyed with the fact of not going to that, but I figured I'd get a couple hours of sleep, and we'll see what happens. I was on the phone with our Secretary-Treasurer, Jim Whitty, and we were talking about some things, and my wife, Sherry, suggested that we open the Union Hall the very next morning for some food, some drinks, and some football on TV, and just a place to hang out. That was a light bulb moment. We automatically knew that was going to be a great idea, just to give the members a safe, relaxing place to come hang out and talk if they wanted to talk. I finally silenced my phone, got a couple hours of sleep, woke up in the afternoon, made some calls, got cleaned up, and my wife and I went to our fire station holiday Christmas party. At the party, you could really tell how much some of our members, again, we have a young department, some of our younger members were really struggling still. There's a lot of second guessing. They were looking to some of the older and retired members who went to the party for reassurance that we did what we should have done and all that we could have done. Just like the Union Hall being open, looking back on that, going to that Christmas party, it did a lot of good for our mental health, being surrounded by some long-term friends, coworkers, and peers and mentors. That was really helpful to the membership, and certainly for me personally as well. It was important to make sure that people didn't drink and drive. We had some designated drivers and rooms for the night, because naturally, as we've talked over the last couple of days about firefighters and PTSD, sometimes the drinking can come out with that. And at this time, about 24 hours after the fire started, the official body count was still well below the 36 that it would eventually become. The next morning, this is the email showing us opening up the Union Hall. I think it's important right now to show that if anyone is looking for a safe place to be, low-key, just a place to hang out, that's what we sent out to the membership that day. The next morning at the Union Hall, we had breakfast burritos open in the morning. Members slowly started to trickle in. Several on-duty companies transitioned and came by throughout the day. Football games on TV, people just talking, some quietly in the corner, talking to just one of their best buds, other people being more social and gregarious, talking to everybody. District Vice President Frank Lima showed up, and he stayed for quite a while. He kept changing his flight to hang out with us. That really meant a lot for us. Thank you so much, Vice President Lima. This was a low-key and informal way of providing a safe and comfortable place for our members to be at a time when I think they really needed it most. We also did it again the following weekend as well, after that first week of body recovery. I can't speak enough about how important those 2 Sundays were to helping our membership, and again, I have to thank my wife, Sherry, for that suggestion. Also, that first weekend after the incident, our fire admin had our critical incident stress management team visit fire stations. These were formally scheduled visits with some companies told to show up at a neighboring station. And some of the feedback I received from our members was quite negative towards this approach. We've already talked about the type of attempt to deal with firefighter PTSI by forcing participation can sometimes do more harm than good. And I think this drives home the need to utilize the peer behavioral health programs more in line with the IFF's program. In my role as a company officer and both as Local 55's president, I thought it was really important to circle back with some individual crew members that were with me that night, and also to check in with our membership body as a whole regarding our overall behavioral health. In Oakland, as it is in probably many other places, we have a lot of issues relative to changing our culture in terms of our openness of discussing mental health issues. There's still plenty of archaic thinking in Oakland about how this works and everything. As an example, after circling back with my probationary firefighter who was with me that night, he told me that when he attended his mandated CISM session, his officer who was with him for the day told him, "I'm going to recommend you go home for the rest of the day. You're opening up too much. You need to keep that inside. You need to bottle it up, because that's how we roll in Oakland." It goes without saying that that particular captain obviously has some issues of his own to work through, and that led to some further discussions, both between myself and that captain and myself and that probationary firefighter about our mental health. As an aside, I'd like to take a quick second to talk about my personal behavioral health history on the job. My second run in the fire service ever, my first day out of the academy, was an execution-style murder. Since then, I've had more than my share of violent incidents and fire fatalities than I want to talk about or I can consciously remember. And over the years, my personal struggles have led to relationship and substance abuse issues. They reached a low point with I failed an on-duty drug test, and it sent me to drug addiction rehabilitation. All of that ultimately led me to some brutally honest self-reflection, and it created a willingness in me to realize that I needed to utilize our employee assistance programs to max out our benefit. And I've tried to speak much more openly to other members about my issues in hopes that people can learn from them and move on. When the IAFF released its white paper at the Las Vegas convention, it really prompted me to make even more of a conscious effort to put my personal issues out in front and to speak freely about them around the firehouse kitchen table, in hopes to keep dialogue going and eliminate the stigma of seeking help for for behavioral health issues that we all go through. In the weeks after the ghost ship, mid-December through mid-January, or through the end of January, I feel that I failed in my ability to look after our membership because I failed to look after myself. The stress of the holidays, family commitments, the crush of media inquiries, the whirlwind of political activity was crazy. Suddenly, our mayor, and in Oakland, everyone's always focused on OPD, it's the cops, the cops, the cops. Suddenly, our mayor and our city council had to focus on the fire department for all the wrong reasons, so that kind of thrust us in the limelight. As an organization, the fire department and the city became totally overwhelmed with the media crush. Our fire chief basically disappeared. At the end of January, while I was off duty, I suffered a torn quadriceps tendon. I was sitting at home, had surgery for knee surgery, sitting at home for 6 months. All these things added to our institutional PTSI. We've talked about organizational PTSI yesterday, and I really think that's an accurate description of what happened in Oakland. The city issued their gag orders, their press and media gag orders. We had no leadership in the department. Like I mentioned, our fire chief basically disappeared. The media was tearing us up with public records requests. They ripped into our Fire Prevention Bureau for failed inspections. Our Fire Prevention Bureau is civilian and non-sworn, so that led to even further divisiveness within the organization. There were some who were questioning our strategy and tactics operationally at the ghost ship. In mid-February, we had a fire at a boarding house on San Pablo Avenue, and it resulted in 4 civilian fatalities. There was a paper trail from 2 or 3 weeks before the fire that showed the local engine company and battalion chief had contacted the Fire Prevention Bureau to try to get it shut down prior to the fire happening. It didn't happen. Once again, the media got a hold of that and just ripped into us. I think it's fair to say that the entire Oakland Fire Department as an organization was, and to some extent still is right now, suffering from institutional PTSI. One of the positive things that happened during this time is the number of Oakland firefighters that were trained as IFF peer behavioral health counselors rose to 11 as we got another group to complete the training. That's been a big deal for us, and we're pushing hard to get our program off the ground. Going forward, we hope to establish a much more robust EAP program specifically for firefighters with counselors that specialize in treating first responders. We're going to try really hard to work through our workers' comp carrier and the city's HR department and have PTSI looked at and treated as any other on-the-job injury. Our number one goal is to greatly increase the number of members trained in IFF peer behavioral health. And to that end, our interim fire chief last week committed to trying to bring a class to Oakland in the near future. So hopefully in early 2018, we can be hosting a peer behavioral health training session. It's going to take time for us as an organization to heal and to learn from this and other incidents of this type as we try to move on. For myself and for Chief Bauron, the chance to prepare and give this presentation has gone a long way to help us moving in that direction as we continue to evaluate the lessons learned from the Ghost Ship Warehouse fire. And our hope is that the 36 lives lost will rest in peace and we'll have a legacy for them. I'd like to thank our wives, Sherry and Alyssa. Thank my co-presenter, Chief Bowron, Interim Chief of the Fire Department, Darren White, Deputy Chief Mark Hoffman, Interim Chief Eric Logan, Interim Deputy Chief Melinda Drayton, Battalion Chief Nick Luby, Captain Chris Foley, Lieutenant George Freeland, Principal Officers in Local 55, Zach Unger, Sean Burrows, Chuck Garcia, Jim Whitty, Aaron Lee, Ryan Nishimoto, and Joe Baldwin, all of my Local 55 Executive Board, all of our IFF members who are trained in peer behavioral health. They've been essential in the last 6 to 8 months helping us out. I'd like to thank the locals that reached out to me, and I hope I didn't forget any. San Francisco Firefighters, Local 798, Alameda City Firefighters, Local 689, Berkeley Firefighters, Local 1227, San Jose Firefighters, Local 230, Hayward Firefighters, 1909, Santa Rosa Firefighters, 1401, the Alameda County portion of Local 55, California Professional Firefighters, 4th District Vice President Jeff Del Bono, CPF President Lou Polson, Frank Lima, I've thanked you already. I can't thank you enough. Thank you very much. Assistant to the General President, Dr. Lori Moore Merrill, Assistant to the General President, Pat Morrison, and thank you very much, General President Faberger.
Profound presentation.
Thank you, sir.
I really love hearing your personal story.